Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13, 1743, in the Virginia colony. He was the third of 10 children born to Peter Jefferson, a successful planter and surveyor, and Jane Randolph, who hailed from one of Virginia's most distinguished families. Jefferson's youth was marked by long hours exploring the woods on his family's estate and devouring books from its well-stocked library. When his father died unexpectedly in 1757, 14-year-old Jefferson inherited 5,000 acres of land and dozens of enslaved people. At 16, he entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, where he came under the influence of Dr. William Small, a Scottish professor who introduced him to the European Enlightenment. Jefferson read voraciously Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, and was deeply shaped by Locke's theories of natural rights and the social contract. These ideas would later become central to Jefferson's political philosophy. By 1767, after studying law under the esteemed George Wythe, Jefferson was admitted to the Virginia bar, becoming one of the most erudite young lawyers in the colonies. But these were turbulent times. As Britain imposed new taxes and exerted greater control, Jefferson saw colonial liberties under threat. In 1769, he entered public life as a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, where he became a passionate critic of British imperial policy. In 1772, Jefferson married Martha Wales Skelton, a young widow from a wealthy family. They moved into a small one-room brick house on his hilltop estate, Monticello, later transformed into the neoclassical mansion we know today. In 1773, he helped organize Virginia's committees of correspondence, shadow governments that coordinated resistance in all the colonies. The following year, he published a summary view of the rights of British America, a fiery pamphlet that asserted the colony's right to self-government. When the Second Continental Congress convened in 1776, Jefferson, just 33, was selected to help draft the Declaration of Independence. He secluded himself in a rented room in Philadelphia and poured his passion and philosophy into the document. The result was a masterful statement of Enlightenment principles, anchored by the immortal line, "All men are created equal." On July 4, 1776, the Declaration was adopted, and Jefferson's place in history was sealed. Though he didn't fight on the battlefield, Jefferson played a key civic role during the Revolutionary War. Back in Virginia, he joined the new House of Delegates and pursued sweeping reforms. One of his crowning achievements was authoring the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which severed ties between the Anglican Church and state, and guaranteed freedom of worship to people of all faiths. He also proposed a radical public education system, believing that only an educated citizenry could preserve democracy. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, he warned, it expects what never was and never will be. Elected governor of Virginia in 1779, Jefferson's term was marked by crisis as British forces led by Benedict Arnold and Lord Cornwallis invaded. His government fled the capital, and critics accused him of indecisiveness. Wounded by the criticism and devastated by his wife's declining health, Jefferson stepped down in 1781, at the end of his term. Martha Jefferson died the following year after complications from childbirth, leaving Jefferson heartbroken. He briefly retreated from public life, but in 1783 he was appointed as a delegate to the Confederation Congress. There, he drafted the Ordinance of 1784, envisioning a westward expansion of states governed by equal laws, and importantly, he proposed banning slavery in all new territories after 1800. The clause narrowly failed by one vote. In 1785, Jefferson replaced Benjamin Franklin as American minister to France. While in Paris, he closely observed the early stages of the French Revolution and enjoyed the city's rich intellectual life. It was during this period that his relationship with Sally Hemings, an enslaved teenager and his late wife's half-sister, began. Hemings had traveled to France with Jefferson's daughter, and in a country where slavery was illegal, she could have claimed her freedom. Instead, she agreed to return to Virginia under the condition that her children would be freed at age 21. Today, DNA evidence and extensive research confirm Jefferson fathered at least 6 of Hemings' children after his wife's death, a truth long denied. Returning to the U.S. in 1789, Jefferson re-entered politics when George Washington appointed him as the nation's first Secretary of State. There, he clashed with Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton over the future of the young republic. Jefferson envisioned an agrarian democracy grounded in local power, while Hamilton pushed for a strong central government and industrial economy. Their debates shaped America's first political divide. When Hamilton successfully proposed the creation of the first Bank of the United States in 1791 to create a stable currency and manage the war debt, Jefferson opposed it, considering it was an extreme overreach and that the Constitution did not grant that authority to the federal government. In fact, he argued against federal overreach, warning it could lead to tyranny reminiscent of British monarchy. More broadly, Jefferson feared large financial institutions and industry, believing they would create dependency, corruption, and inequality. The friction reached a boiling point during a fierce debate over foreign policy, as France and Britain collided in the aftermath of the Revolution. Jefferson, viewing the French struggle as a natural extension of America's revolutionary principles, advocated support for France. Hamilton, however, was horrified by the excesses of the French Revolution and argued passionately for neutrality and closer ties with Britain, the world's dominant economic and naval power. President Washington ultimately sided with Hamilton's pragmatic neutrality, intensifying Jefferson's frustration and prompting his resignation in 1793. This deep rift laid the groundwork for the establishment of the Federalist Party, led by Hamilton and Adams, and the Democratic-Republican Party, led by Jefferson and Madison, forming the basis for America's enduring two-party system. In the 1796 election, Jefferson narrowly lost to Adams but became vice president, a result of the electoral rules of the time. However, their once close friendship gave way to suspicion and ideological estrangement. In fact, tensions deepened under Adams, especially with the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts, used to suppress dissent. In response, Jefferson and Madison secretly authored the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, asserting that states could nullify unconstitutional federal laws. Jefferson ran again in 1800. After a deadlock with Aaron Burr in the Electoral College, the House of Representatives broke the tie on the 36th ballot, thanks in part to Hamilton, who distrusted Burr more than he did Jefferson. Jefferson's victory marked the first peaceful transition of power between political parties in U.S. history. In his inaugural address, he declared, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists," calling for national unity. As president, Jefferson reduced the size of the Army and Navy, abolished internal taxes like the whiskey tax, and aimed to pay down the national debt. Jefferson's belief was that the federal government should be as unobtrusive as possible in citizens' lives. However, global events soon forced him to exercise power more pragmatically than his strict ideology might have predicted. In 1801, when the Pasha of Tripoli demanded higher tribute from American ships, Jefferson refused. Instead, he sent the U.S. Navy to the Mediterranean, launching the First Barbary War. The campaign ended in 1805 with a modest but symbolic victory, America's first overseas military success. Jefferson's most significant achievement as president was undoubtedly the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which instantly doubled the nation's territory. He had long been concerned about American access to the port of New Orleans, crucial for Western farmers, and grew alarmed at the prospect of an aggressive French empire next door. Unexpectedly, Napoleon offered the entire Louisiana territory, 828,000 square miles, for $15 million, needing funds for his European wars while also recognizing that a stronger United States could weaken Britain in the future. At just 4 cents per acre, the Louisiana Purchase was simply too advantageous to reject. However, it presented a constitutional dilemma for Jefferson, a strict constructionist who found no explicit authorization for territorial acquisition in the Constitution. After much deliberation, even drafting a possible constitutional amendment, he pragmatically set aside his strict principles and embraced the treaty, reasoning that the executive's treaty-making power justified it. His decision earned him unanimous public acclaim. To explore the new territory, Jefferson commissioned the famous Lewis and Clark expedition between 1804 and 1806. He personally tutored his secretary Meriwether Lewis in the sciences of mapping, botany, and zoology before sending him and William Clark to find a route to the Pacific. Their journey of over 8,000 miles produced invaluable maps, diplomatic contacts with Native American nations, and scientific observations of Western flora and fauna. He also dispatched other expeditions such as that of Zebulon Pike to the Rocky Mountains and the Red River to advance knowledge of the continent. Domestically, Jefferson's first term was prosperous and relatively uncontentious. He won a landslide re-election in 1804. However, his second term was troubled by international tensions. Britain and France, locked in war, targeted American shipping. British impressment of American sailors outraged the public. Jefferson responded with the Embargo Act of 1807, halting all U.S. exports in hopes of pressuring Europe. The result was economic disaster at home. New England's trading economy was paralyzed and exports plummeted from $108 million to $22 million in a single year. The embargo was widely evaded and deeply unpopular. Recognizing its failure, Jefferson relented and signed a repeal shortly before leaving office in 1809. This policy misstep tarnished the final years of Jefferson's presidency, harming American farmers and traders without compelling European concessions. Nonetheless, his administration left the nation stronger than he had found it. One notable reform was the 1808 ban on the international slave trade in the U.S. While it did not abolish slavery, it signaled growing unease with the institution. Jefferson and many of his contemporaries hoped this measure would set slavery on the path to eventual extinction, a hope that, tragically, did not come to pass, as the enslaved population continued to grow through internal trade. After 2 terms as president, Jefferson happily retired from public office in March 1809. At 65, he returned home to Monticello, relieved to escape the splendid misery of the presidency and resume life as a gentleman scholar. His retirement, however, was far from idle. He immersed himself in intellectual pursuits, revitalizing Monticello's gardens, exchanging letters with John Adams and leading thinkers worldwide, and indulging his curiosity in astronomy, agriculture, and mechanics. His most significant project during this period was founding the University of Virginia, which opened in 1819, an institution he personally helped design, staff, and philosophically shape. But Jefferson's final years were shadowed by crushing debt. He spent lavishly, co-signed loans for others, and faced declining income from his plantations. By 1826, his health was failing. As the 50th anniversary of American independence approached, in the early hours of July 4th, he awakened and whispered, "Is it the 4th?" When his doctor confirmed that it was, a faint smile crossed his lips. Around midday, Thomas Jefferson passed away in his bed at Monticello. In a striking coincidence, John Adams, Jefferson's longtime friend turned rival turned friend again, died just hours later in Massachusetts. Reportedly, his last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives," unaware that Jefferson had preceded him in death. Their passing on Independence Day stunned the nation, widely seen as a sign of divine favor on the American experiment. As per his wishes, Jefferson was buried at Monticello under a simple gray obelisk. The epitaph, which he composed himself, listed the achievements he valued most: author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Notably, it made no mention of his presidency, a deliberate omission. Jefferson wanted to be remembered for his contributions to ideas and institutions rather than the power he held. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deeper look at one of America's most complex founding fathers, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss our next journey through history. See you next time.